Welcome to Ignite and Inspire, a podcast by entrepreneurs who were once in your shoes. My name is Tina Hamilton. I'm the CEO and founder of MyHRPartner.
Today's guest is Tina Hamilton. We're turning the mics around on Tina this time to hear your story. CEO and founder of MyHRPartner and membership co-chair for EO Philadelphia. And this whole thing is kind of your brainchild.
Yeah.
In case, I don't know what order these are coming out in, but if no one knows me, I'm Vince Scian, founder of 15M Media. We produce this podcast. We're an SAP with EO Philadelphia. But this episode is about you. So today we're kind of talking about the building your way up. Because that's really how your journey went, building your way up. But first, let's talk about what you do now. So what does MyHRPartner do?
So MyHRPartner is an HR outsourcing firm. We create teams of HR people and create mini HR departments scaled to the size of what the organization needs. So they have all the different levels that they would need to run proper HR organization. We have clients in 43 states around the country, and we've been in business for 22 years.
Awesome. So MyHRPartner itself has only existed for 22 years. That's obviously not the full story of your entrepreneurial journey. Right. And I don't even want to start where that starts. Let's go all the way back to 15 years old, right?
Right.
So let's start your story from there and kind of go through to how you built up to running your business, 40 plus employees now, right? Yeah. So let's start from 15 to now.
Okay. Fast forward story.
Yeah.
So at 15, let me just say I grew up in a very non-traditional household. My father was a Holocaust survivor. My mother emigrated from Cuba. And it was a tough upbringing. And so at 15, I decided to move out. I just thought I knew what to do and how to live on my own and that life would be grand. And so I did, and convinced people that I was older so I could get jobs, and started working in a convenience store world. Got married very young, had a son very, very young. And ended up a single mother very young, all under the age of 20. So I was driven, to support him and create a life for us. And so I was working in convenience store business. It was tough, 90 hours a week, but I learned a lot in that world, honestly. I think anybody that works in a service industry of any kind, you learn a lot of things about people and business and et cetera. So I got burned out of all the hours I was working and decided to go apply at a staffing service and see if I could find a job in an office. I thought that would be the solution. So every staffing service I applied to actually offered for me to work at the staffing service internally. And one really persisted, and I thought, well, sure, why not? This is going to be a great new industry to learn. And I started working in this business and did pretty well. I was moving up in management at a very young age. And the business was great. I was living out in Florida for about 8 years and decided I wanted to come home. I wanted to come back to Philadelphia, where I was born and raised. And so they transferred me. But when I transferred, I was pretty unhappy with the environment. The schools were really rough where my son had to go. And so I started applying, found another staffing service in the Lehigh Valley area. And it was there where I started running this business for somebody. And he literally just handed over the reins, opened up a bank account, and said, I want you to run this business for me, which was a big responsibility. And for whatever reason, I just said, okay, I think I can do this. I wasn't strangely concerned about it, like I should have been maybe. And eventually I started realizing it was more we could do with the business, but he wasn't very involved. He had other businesses. And so I approached him and said, would it be okay if I bought you out? I'd like to buy you out. And by the way, will you finance me to buy me out, and so I can buy you out? And he was intrigued by it and liked the idea that I was flourishing under his ownership. I think he was a good guy, and so he did. He financed me, and I started running this business and opened up a second location, and things were going really well. And I thought at this time that I was running a business on my own. that it was like my own, that I was an entrepreneur. I felt like that, I guess. I don't know that I used the word entrepreneur, but it felt like it.
Kind of like a safety net almost a little bit though, right?
Yeah, because it's not my money. It wasn't my money. And when I did buy them out, everything changed. Suddenly, it was my money. And these people did work for me, and their lives were, I was responsible for their careers and their lives. And even the relationships started to shift. And they needed to shift because I was an employee and now I was a business owner. And I had to think differently. And if I hadn't had that opportunity, I would have never, been able to. So, have my own business perhaps. So, so I grew that business. I had 2 locations and things were going really well. And this was a franchise. So they one day bring all the franchise owners onto a group call and announce that they merged with another organization. And I had to either buy out my competitor or sell back to the organization. One of us had to buy each other out or sell back to the company. Those were my options. I was in my early 30s. I was just starting to really make a paycheck, and I wouldn't even call it a big paycheck because it was never about money for me. And it was about, I was focused on building this thing and making it into something. Obviously, I had to care about money. I was a single mother of a son and, pay our bills. But I look back and think, wow, I maybe should have done that a little differently, but I didn't. So anyway, when the opportunity came, it wasn't even an opportunity because my competitor didn't do business in the same ethical way that I did business. So buying him out was never an option. So I had to sell back. And when I sold back, I had this time off for the first time in my life. I was on my own since I was 15. I was married for a short period, and I struggled my whole life. Never went to college. So this was a time for me to really look and figure out what I wanted to do next. Bottom line, I went through a lot of phases of what I wanted to do. At one period, I was thinking about becoming Elmo at Sesame Place and just making people laugh and smile because that was my favorite thing to do, was make people laugh. And that luckily did not come to fruition. But I came up with the idea. I started thinking about ideas about my own business. I somehow just intuitively knew that I needed to have another business. And so luckily, I was able to come up with ideas through brainstorming a lot about what things I enjoyed in my first business and what things I didn't enjoy in my first business. And I ended up going on a vacation, and during that vacation, it came to me in a dream, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that is what happened. And I think from months and months and months of just trying to brainstorm on what I should do and how I should do it, that it came to be. So I woke up in the middle of the night and I wrote down all my ideas. At this point, I'm married, and I was a workaholic and in my first business, and I knew that he if he saw me working, thinking about work, he might be like a little agitated. So I put it away and forgot about it, came home, and it was like a few weeks later, I'm like, oh yeah, that idea. And I pulled it back out and I started doing the things that just I thought would be the next steps. I did a market survey. I thought, well, I should call some companies and see if this idea I came up with, which was, by the way, the idea was outsourcing. The word wasn't outsourcing at that time. Didn't exist. But it was outsourcing the process of hiring. The idea was to help small business owners get to know who they were and what their culture was and help them hire people that would fit into that culture. That was just the idea. So I started calling, and I called about 35 companies. And people were surprisingly willing to give me a lot of information.
The same thing happened when I started this business.
Is that right?
I would go into the stores trying to sell Verizon Internet, I thought I was going to get booted out immediately of every store. The amount of businesses that listened I thought was surprising, and kind of some of the catalyst of doing my own thing. Because I'm like, a business owner will listen to any deal that will give them a leg up on someone else. So that's interesting that you kind of had the same experience.
Yeah, it was right. And people want to help you naturally. So people were not only answering my questions, they were giving me ideas on other things I could do. And the next thing you knew, somebody called me and said, hey, I know you're not in business yet, but I really liked your idea that you called me about. Would you do it for me? And I didn't have anything. I still had a corporation form for my first company that was still existing on paper. So I said, yeah, I mean, I knew I could do the hiring well. And so I charged them a great price and started working with them and created the systems and processes as I went along. Because the one thing I learned for sure in my first business, especially owning a franchise is you're buying systems and processes. So I knew that systems and processes were critically important. And so they let me do that. And then another company called and another. And at one point, I had to actually just stop because I didn't want to be, my goal was never to be an independent consultant. That's not who I am. And my goal was to create a company. So I had to stop, start to document some of the things, and then look to hire my first person, my first employee, in the basement of my house, in an office that that I put together, slapped together, and got permission to have a business in there because in those days people didn't work from home. It was a long time ago. So hired my first employee, and started to grow from there.
So with both your businesses, they both kind of came after a point of, I don't want to say stability because I wasn't there, but the fact that you were running someone else's business at first, there was job security, it was someone else's money. You were kind of getting your reps in on how to run that business.
Absolutely.
And then the second time, you had time off. You were married at that point.
Right.
So you had stable home life, I assume. You had security. You had time to be creative.
Right.
I feel like that's another story I've heard repeated in multiple entrepreneurs' journeys, is that being an entrepreneur is chaotic in itself. Coming up with ideas of how to run your business, how to be better than the next business, and all that is so chaotic that as much outside the business as possible needs to be stable. So I've heard multiple stories of greatness, good ideas coming out of some kind of outside stability.
Right. Yeah, I would say stability. Also, I would say, I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have any kind of education about business. My father owned a little corner deli, and I started working there at 10 years old. So I watched him, and I think there's something there when you're part of somebody's business, watching them and seeing it becomes part of you. But I think when you have something driving you, like single parent or just being on your own and having to feed yourself or whatever, there's something that you become. The fear of certain things aren't fearful to you. It's more of a fear of not doing things right and not being able to figure it out than the fear of taking whatever steps it was to figure it out. I was never scared about either business at any point. I've had days that were scary in business because of different things happening, but it never dawned on me to be fearful about starting a business. I can't even explain that why. I just wasn't.
Do you think your son had something to do with it? Just the fact that, I need to put food on the table, so there needs to be money. There's no option where there isn't money.
Probably. Subconsciously.
Yeah.
Right?
You kind of have to trick your subconscious brain into doing this innately uncomfortable thing of completely being self-reliant, I guess.
Yeah.
I've never jumped out of a plane, but I assume it has to be a similar mindset.
In a way, it was like there was this opportunity. The first business, it was an opportunity to buy it. I was sure I could do it better because I was already running it for him. And so the business, I didn't think the business was going to do as well if he kept running it. So it was almost like I was more focused on the business itself. And then, of course, it became exciting when I knew I could become a business owner. But the whole time, even now, the only time money started really coming into it is when I didn't have enough, because there were periods, 2007, 2008, when the market crashed, and the business at that point in time was 95% hiring and a little bit of human resources. And it's a longer story, but the bottom line is during that period, we started working on the idea of offering HR because the demand started coming. The more we offered, the more clients wanted in regards to HR. And luckily, we were just about to roll out this HR service when the market crashed. And And so we became an HR company, and hiring became like a line item under. But it was a hard time, and we lost money during that period because it was like overnight. The market crashed, and people weren't hiring, and that was 95% of my business. We went into debt, a terrible thing to do when you're in business. Once I got out of that debt, which took about 10 years, just because of that few-year period, I promised I would run my business debt-free from there forward, and I still do that, and I could sleep at night.
So I want to talk a little bit about the building along
Sure.
the way, right?
Yeah.
So that was obviously a big step, building, learning not to be in debt. Like,
Right.
it's a tough lesson to learn.
It is.
But so when you were running the original business before you owned it, some other person could have been like, this is a comfortable job, I can do this forever.
Yes.
Talk about why you felt like you had an opportunity to take this business over.
Yeah.
Taking that opportunity, that's
Yeah.
kind of what I
Yeah.
want to talk about.
You know, I think just from being an entrepreneur and knowing other entrepreneurs, there's almost like I don't know if it's DNA or what it is, but there's something that drives you that is beyond reason. And all I could see was this owner, very successful business owner. He had multiple businesses, dozens of them. This was just an investment for him. He didn't even live in my state. He lived in Chicago. He wasn't paying enough attention. I knew the business was suffering because of it. And I wanted to do things that he just squashed, but he didn't really understand the why. And I knew the why. I knew if I applied these things, the business would run. So it was almost as if I was more worried about the business than I was about myself. But of course, it was an opportunity, in buying it. And so that's oddly what drove me. And then I bought it, and then suddenly I realized, wow, this is pretty cool. And I could do something with this.
I've always seen it as, like, entrepreneurs, I think, especially one that wants to grow a business with employees, like, you have to be unselfish a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But in situations like that, I feel like we're always a little bit selfish, because you're like, how
Yeah.
can I run this but to make my life better? It's like, I could own it. And then
Yeah.
that's kind of what you did. So they're kind of like the most selfish people, I think.
Yeah.
Selfish in the sense of, like, how can I do this where actually
Yeah.
benefit me and my family?
Yeah,
and
I don't
people
even know
around
that
me?
I'll be honest, I don't even know that I was thinking that way. It was more of, I knew I could run this business better and make it more successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my driving force. And then there was an opportunity for me to own it. So sure, yeah, that was great. But it was more about that. It was more about, I've always been about building something greater or better. And that's what drove me.
Yeah.
Before money, before security. I think security was always there, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So the desire to build, too, that's something I also hear a lot. And I have the same thing. I feel like every entrepreneur you talk to is going to have pretty big
Yeah.
ambitions. Where do you think that comes from? And then how do you see it helping you day to day?
Well, I had a lot of mountains to climb in business. I mean, in my life, not in business, in my life. Moving out so young, I was in a very abusive relationship. Been through some very tough times, and it's about surviving. And it sounds kind of corny. It wasn't like I sat back and thought, I must survive. What do I need to do? It was just taking the next step forward, and just moving yourself along. And maybe I had something to prove too, I think, inside. Because I didn't go to college, I always felt, and because I had a son, I was 17 when my son was born, I always felt inadequate. Everybody was old. All the other mothers and football and baseball and all the things he was involved in, they were all older than me. And everyone I know in business had a college degree. And I think inside I always felt like I had something to prove. I think it was very subconscious. But I remember always feeling inadequate around certain people, certain groups of people. And so I just kept working hard. And, it's momentum in business, right? You keep working hard, doing the right thing, having the right values. It will happen. Unless you have a really bad idea.
Yeah. I find that the bad ideas don't find the hard workers very often.
Oh, it's interesting.
And when they do, they have the right people around them to filter them. Or the right person can make a bad idea a good idea, I think.
That's probably true. Yeah.
So I think last question. So speaking to yourself or just any 17, 18-year-old mom out there that has an idea to start a business and she's like, but I got to make sure my kid eats, what would you say to them?
I think obviously your kid has to eat, so you do have to figure that out, how you're going to make that happen. But it's not to question yourself. If you have something you want to do, just start it. You're going to feel inadequate. Guess what? Every single person starts a business feels inadequate or continues to feel inadequate at periods throughout that business. Everyone. And now that I'm part of EO, I meet people that have businesses worth billions because I travel globally with EO, and they have inadequacies. I see it. So I think like eliminating the thought that people are better than you or smarter than you, it doesn't matter. They might be. It doesn't matter. All that matters is your idea, and keep moving it along and pushing it along. If you believe in it, if you really believe in it, you'll do it. And keep your eye on that. And then just the other piece, if I could share, piece of experience, an experience that I have is cash. Hang on to the cash. Do not go into debt. Do not live beyond your means. And if that means you can't do things you can't do, then you just don't do them. It's okay.
You do what the cash lets you do. Because
the world is different now. When I was growing up, you didn't have Starbucks calling you at $5, $6 a cup, and you weren't competing on the same about things. It wasn't so much about material things as it is now, and I think that hurts people because they think they have to have these things, or they think they need the nice watch in order to be able to do business because it doesn't look right if you have a watch from Target or Kmart or whatever. Like you need these things. You don't need any of those things. You need to believe in yourself. You need to pursue what you want to pursue and just keep going, and then get the right advice surround yourself around people that are going to give you the right advice. Do not surround yourself with the same people that, maybe you grew up with or whatever. If they're not in the same mindset, doesn't mean you can't be friends with them. You can maintain those friendships, but you need to surround yourself around people that know what they're doing. Because that's what I did. I was constantly watching people and picking up pieces from them and adding it to my knowledge base.
Ryan Finley from EO, he's the EOA chair, I believe. This isn't his quote, it's him saying someone else's quote, but he was the first person I heard say it. You're the product of the 5 closest people around you.
Yeah.
And the 5 closest people to him were another entrepreneur. So he was like, that was his reason to join EO, which that's not available to everybody. There's a threshold, but go find your peers in entrepreneurship. There's other people that run businesses that are at the same level as you. Go surround yourself with them.
Right. That's so absolutely so important. And when I joined EO, Eric Griffin, who's going to be on next, said to me, something magical happens when you join. And he was right. Once you're around people that are motivated by the same things as you, and you start realizing they're no different than you. Mm-hmm. They really aren't. Like it's a fantasy to believe that everybody came from a trust fund family that owns a business or had special privileges. I didn't have any special privileges. Believe me, I remember watching my son eat chicken wings and hoping he didn't eat them all so I could have something protein that night. So no, anybody can do it. You just have to have that, that belief in yourself and somehow, and motivation to just keep going, and you'll do it. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to suck. It's okay. Sucking isn't a bad thing necessarily. People relate that it sounds like it sucks, that's bad, right? But you're growing. Yeah.
Yep. All right, well, this has been great. I think we hit everything that I wanted to hear from you. If there's any point that you didn't bring up, now's the time. But I think this was a great episode.
Oh, thank you.
Great. All right,
Great.
Thank you.
If you'd like to know more about Entrepreneurs Organization or EO Accelerator or EO Ignite, go to eophiladelphia.com.